Is it true that Admiral Nelson at the Battle of Trafalgar died of a surfeit of Austerlitz? Did Napoleon sell Louisiana to America in exchange for Haiti? Was Napoleon unable to conquer Spain because he had to fight a guerrilla war there? These and other questions will be answered right after this. I'm Professor Jerome Arkenberg, and I've been teaching a wide variety of history courses at colleges across this country for the past 30 years. In this video, I'm going to tell you about the conditions of France under Napoleon, Napoleon's most brilliant land battle and worst sea battle, how Napoleon humiliated first the Prussians and then the Austrians, how Napoleon repeatedly defeated the Russians but not decisively, and how the British blockade led Napoleon to set up his continental system, which led him into disastrous wars in Spain, Portugal, and eventually Russia. At the end, I'll have the wrap-up quote on this video. But first, make sure to click like, share, and especially subscribe, and that little bell thingy, so I can continue to bring you more great videos just like this one. In 1804, another plebiscite was held, and of 3.6 million male French voters, only 2,569 voted against Napoleon, declaring himself hereditary Emperor of the French. In the December of the year, Napoleon crowned himself at the Cathedral of Notre Dame in the presence of Pope Pius VII, who had been forced to travel to Paris for the event, as seen here. Napoleon's hereditary monarchy rested on popular sovereignty, but there was no return of land to church or nobility, no return of the guilds or monopolies, no return of serfdom, no return to legal inequality, as Napoleon, who thought of himself as a son of the revolution, thought he was saving the revolution, not overseeing a return to absolutism. Indeed, administration was further centralized and made efficient, and the Code Civil, otherwise known as the Code Napoleon, guaranteed liberty, equality, personal property, civil divorce, and marriage, as it still does in France and its former colonies, and much of modern Europe. Napoleon did establish a new hereditary aristocracy based on the ranks of his military officers, most of whom rose from humble origins, much like Napoleon himself, making this a meritocracy, opening careers in public service and government to all, regardless of birth. Of course, Napoleon rewarded his family quite well. His wife Josephine's nephew, Eugène de Beauharnais, was given command of an army, essentially Napoleon's heir in many ways. Napoleon's brother Louis eventually will become the King of Holland. His brother Joseph will become King of Spain. Lucien did not want to be a king, but remained nonetheless a powerful man in France. Now, of course, his sisters Eliza, Caroline, and Pauline were married off to the finest of European royalty. And, of course, his youngest brother, Jerome, was eventually made the King of Westphalia. Napoleon, married to Josephine de Beauharnais, adopted her daughter Stephanie, as well as her son, as I said, Eugène de Beauharnais, became one of his top officers, as Napoleon later did with his own son, Alexandra, by his mistress, the Polish Marie Walewska. All was backed by a conscript army. Some 3 million served by 1815, but the press was strictly controlled, people deemed a threat were held without trial, and actual liberties were highly restricted. Nonetheless, because of the heights to which Napoleon took France, his regime was highly popular until the very end. Indeed, the French look back upon the First Empire as a golden age to this very day. Napoleon tried to rebuild France's colonial empire by sending an army to Haiti. But this frightened the British. The British had given Haiti back, in theory, along with some of the other French colonies, to France, but an actual Napoleonic army in the Caribbean worried the crap out of the British. So that even when Napoleon sold Louisiana to America in 1803, and was eventually forced to recognize Haitian independence, Britain nonetheless declared war in 1804. When Napoleon was on the verge of crossing the Channel and invading England itself, Britain instigated a coalition against him in alliance with Russia, Austria, and Sweden. Here, of course, a number of cartoons. This is actually Napoleon's invasion fleet. And, of course, here they are mocking what will happen to Napoleon when he shows up. Napoleon planned his fleet to draw the Royal Navy out to the Caribbean and then have them slip back to cover his invasion of Britain. But in October of 1805, Admiral Nelson, who was killed in the battle, decisively defeated the Franco-Spanish fleet at the Battle of Trafalgar, and Napoleon was forced to call off the invasion. Napoleon then took command of the army at Boulogne, crossed the Rhine, in a really brilliant campaign, forced the surrender of the Austrian army at Ulm without a shot, and then took Vienna unopposed. Marched around, essentially going up and wound up completely surrounding the Austrian army, and that, the way open, just followed the Danube right down into Vienna. On December 2nd, exactly a year after his coronation as emperor, Napoleon defeated a combined Austro-Russian army at the Battle of Austerlitz, his most brilliant victory. His army coming up at the break of dawn, unexpectedly, suddenly the Russians and the Austrians realize, coming out of the mist of morning was, oh my God, it's the entire frickin' French army. And here we see it. At this point, Austria surrendered, gave up all its territories in Italy to Napoleon, its German lands to Napoleon's allies Bavaria, Baden, and Württemberg, and dissolved the Holy Roman Empire after 1,000 years of existence. Russia, though, continued to fight on, as did, of course, Britain forever. The next year, as part of the War of the Fourth Coalition, Prussia decided to try its luck against Napoleon. It had a crack army, which hadn't been used for actually ages. And unfortunately, while it had a crack army, its main general and its king was nowhere near the equal of Frederick the Great. And at the twin battles of Jena and Auerstedt on the same day, Prussia's army was utterly defeated by Napoleon. Wah, wah. After Napoleon occupied Berlin, he moved into Silesia and East Prussia, but a battle at Eylau proved indecisive, and both sides settled down for the winter. In November of 1806, Napoleon proclaimed a reverse blockade of England through the continental system. While the English blockaded world commerce into French ports, Napoleon sought to cripple Britain's economy by refusing to let any of the continent's resources be sold to Britain or let anyone buy British goods. The next year, after much maneuvering, in June of 1807, the Russians were decisively defeated at the Battle of Friedland. Napoleon then occupied Königsberg and East Prussia and concluded the Peace of Tilsit with Prussia and Russia. Prussia was reduced to a rump. Here it is here. So Prussia remains this part here, but all of its lands here were lost. And its lands in Poland that it got from the first, second, and third partitions were also lost, were made into the Grand Duchy of Warsaw, headed by Prince Stanislaw Poniatowski. The humiliation of the Austrians and Prussians, and France's obvious success in fielding huge armies, led to the widespread adoption of French practices in administration, finance, the economy, the military, and even the law. Nearly all European states, even France's enemies, adopted the Code Napoleon. In Germany, with the abolition of the Holy Roman Empire, mostly as the last Holy Roman Emperor, the Austrian Archduke, who then becomes the Emperor of Austria, was afraid Napoleon would declare himself Holy Roman Emperor, so decided to simply get rid of it before he could. Anyway, with the abolition of the Holy Roman Empire, all the ecclesiastical states, those that were run by bishops, there were a whole bunch of them, were secularized. The free cities were abolished, and over 300 principalities were consolidated into less than 30 states, as seen in the growth here of Napoleon's allies, Baden and Württemberg. Starting out as here with a few things, eventually this becomes Baden, and all of this becomes Württemberg, with all the intervening principalities and parts of ecclesiastical states abolished. In many ways, Napoleon was seen as a liberator to the Germans. Now, when Spain refused to go along with Napoleon's continental system, he invaded the country in March of 1808 and placed his brother Joe Bonaparte, on the Spanish throne, which had the unfortunate effect of sparking a guerrilla war, not a gorilla war, but a guerrilla war, supported by a British army under the command of Sir Arthur Wellesley, who had already made a name for himself in conquest against the Marathas in India, and then he wound up ennobled as the Duke of Wellington for his efforts. The Peninsula War engulfed all of Spain and Portugal and lasted until 1814. A tremendous drag on French resources and the army, with major battles at Albuera, Talavera, Salamanca, Saragossa, and Somosierra. As a byproduct of Napoleon's invasion of Spain, this led to revolution in Latin America, when the Spain's colonies there refused to recognize his brother Joe as king. But when Ferdinand VII was restored in 1814 to the throne of Spain and took away all the freedoms won since 1808, the colonists in the Americas rebelled and won independence in every single colony, except Cuba and Puerto Rico, by 1825. Likewise, in the Portuguese colony of Brazil, the French invasion of Portugal caused its king, John VI, to flee to Brazil. But after the French were driven out of Portugal by the British, he decided to stay in Brazil until he was finally forced to return in 1821 to put his daughter on the throne. Life in Rio is a lot more fun than life in Lisbon, apparently. So his oldest son, Dom Pedro, stayed in Brazil and declared Brazil's independence, with himself as the first emperor of Brazil, Dom Pedro I. Meanwhile, back in Europe, in April of 1809, with Napoleon still at war in Spain, Austria tried its luck again and declared war. But by July 1st, Napoleon occupied Vienna, and on July 6th, at the Battle of Wagram, once more decisively defeated the Austrians. Austria's Adriatic coast, this part right here, was annexed by France. Austrian Poland, this part here, was then given to the Grand Duchy of Warsaw. So technically Poland wasn't yet back on the map, but effectively it was. And Austria was forced to join the continental system and break all ties with Britain. Additionally, Napoleon, eager for an heir, divorced Josephine and married Marie Louise, the Austrian emperor's daughter. Though by all accounts, the two truly did love each other. And in 1811, she gave birth to a son, Napoleon II, who was proclaimed King of Rome. But when Napoleon's brother Louis Bonaparte, King of Holland, refused to ruin Dutch trade by joining the continental system, in 1811, Napoleon annexed Holland. Louis fled to exile in America, where his descendants live to the present day, by the way. And one of his descendants, Charles Bonaparte, was eventually Secretary of War under Theodore Roosevelt. Anyway, Napoleon then annexed the entire North Sea coast to better ensure his continental system against trade with Britain. And the Danes, his ally, continued to follow the continental system. Meanwhile, speaking of Scandinavia, in 1810, the Swedes forced their childless king, Karl XIII, who reigned from 1808 to 1818, to appoint one of Napoleon's marshals, the Frenchman Jean-Baptiste Bernadotte, as his heir and crown prince. Yes, the French now controlled all Europe except Britain, Russia, and the Ottoman Empire, with which it remained at war because of Napoleon's invasion of Egypt. The wrap-up quote. What are the duties of Christians toward those who govern them? And what, in particular, are our duties towards Napoleon, our emperor? Christians owe to the princes who govern them, and we in particular owe to Napoleon, our emperor, love, respect, obedience, fidelity, military service, and the taxes levied for the preservation and defense of the empire and of his throne. We also owe him fervent prayers for his safety and for the spiritual and temporal prosperity of the state. Why are we subject to all these duties toward our emperor? Because God, who has created empires and distributes them according to his will, has, by loading our emperor with gifts both in peace and in war, established him as our sovereign, and made him the agent of his power and his image upon earth. To honor and serve our emperor is therefore to honor and serve God himself. The Imperial Catechism of 1806. Let me know what you think of this quote in the comments section below. Also, what you liked about this video, and what other historical topics or subjects you'd like to see in future videos. Be sure to click like, share, especially subscribe, as it will help me bring you more great videos, and click on that little bell thingy so you'll know when the next History Waits for No One video is posted. If you want to know more, there are recommended studies on this topic in the description below, along with other ways to connect with me. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the past.